Sometimes the ones who need saving the most are the ones who do the rescuing. Sometimes a second chance comes when you least expect it, wrapped in fur and barely breathing. Nate Kemper was 52, divorced, and alone in a small Michigan town when he found a dying German shepherd and her 5 pups outside his door on a frozen February morning. He could have walked away. He could have made a phone call and let someone else handle it. Instead, he carried them inside and made a choice that changed everything. What happened next wasn't just about saving a family of dogs. Could one act of kindness pull a broken man back from the edge? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The divorce papers had been sitting on Nate Kemper's kitchen table for 3 months now, tucked into a manila folder he kept meaning to file away but never did. They represented the official end of 25 years with Catherine, though the marriage had really ended long before the lawyers got involved. Now it was February, and the maple trees outside stood bare against a grey Michigan sky, their branches heavy with ice. Nate had moved to Maple Ridge in late November, a week after the divorce was finalized. The town was small, maybe 4,000 people, tucked into the rolling hills of northern Michigan. He'd found the rental house online, a modest 2-bedroom place with vinyl siding and a small backyard. The landlord had been eager to rent during the off-season, and Nate had been equally eager to find somewhere quiet, somewhere nobody knew him. For 28 years, he'd worked as an automotive engineer at a manufacturing plant outside Detroit. Good job, steady paycheck, the kind of career that let him provide for his family without thinking too much about whether he was actually present in their lives. Catherine had raised their 2 kids mostly on her own, while Nate logged 60-hour weeks and brought his laptop to the dinner table. Their son Bryce was 26 now, working in Austin. Their daughter Lauren was 23, teaching in Ann Arbor. Both sent him polite text messages on holidays, but rarely called. He couldn't blame them. When they were growing up, he'd been the father who missed soccer games and piano recitals, who fell asleep during family movie nights, who took work calls during Christmas dinner. Catherine had asked him for years to slow down, to be more involved. He'd always meant to do better. There was always next month, next year, after this big project finished. Then one day he looked up and realized his kids were grown, his wife had stopped asking, and he'd become a stranger in his own home. The early retirement had been his idea. At 52, he could take a decent pension and walk away. He'd imagined it would be a fresh start, a chance to repair what he'd broken. Instead, Catherine had sat him down 2 weeks after he cleaned out his office and told him she wanted a divorce. She'd been kind about it, which somehow made it worse. She just said she'd spent too many years waiting for him to show up, and she was tired of being lonely in her own marriage. Now Nate lived in a house that wasn't his, in a town where he knew no one, with nothing but time and regret for company. He kept the furniture sparse because he told himself this was temporary. A couch from a thrift store, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, a mattress on the floor. The second bedroom sat empty, except for cardboard boxes he hadn't unpacked. His days had settled into a routine that felt more like sleepwalking than living. He woke early, usually around 5:30, made coffee in the drip machine. He'd sit at the kitchen table with his laptop, reading news he didn't care about, watching the sky lighten over the frozen backyard. Around 8, he'd take a walk through the neighborhood, crunching through snow that had been on the ground since Christmas. He'd nod to neighbors if he passed them, but never stopped to talk. There was old Iris Kowalski, 3 houses down, who always waved from her porch when she was putting out bird seed. There was the young family across the street with the toddler. There was the retired couple who walked their beagle every morning. Nate knew their faces, but not their names. He preferred it that way. Most days he'd drive to the grocery store, buy enough food for a few meals, exchange brief pleasantries with the checkout clerk. He'd come home, make lunch, spend the afternoon reading or watching old movies. When his phone rang, usually Catherine about paperwork, occasionally one of the kids doing their obligatory check-in, he'd answer with careful pleasantness. "How are you doing, Dad?" Lauren would ask, and he'd say, "Fine, honey, I'm doing just fine," even though he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt anything that resembled fine. Bryce was harder to talk to. Their conversations were stilted, full of long pauses. His son was angry with him in a way Lauren wasn't. Bryce would ask pointed questions. "You settling in okay up there?" With an edge that suggested what he really meant was, "Running away going well for you?" Evenings were the worst. The sun set early this time of year, and by 5 o'clock the darkness pressed against the windows. Nate would make dinner, something simple he could eat standing at the counter, then retreat to the couch with a book or the television. He'd fall asleep there more often than not, wake up at 2 in the morning with a stiff neck, then stumble to bed for a few more restless hours. He knew this wasn't sustainable. He knew he was just drifting, letting the days blur together into something that looked like a life, but wasn't one. Catherine had suggested therapy before they separated, and he'd dismissed it. The truth was, he didn't want to talk about it. Talking meant acknowledging that he'd wasted decades chasing something that didn't matter, that he'd traded his family for a career he'd walked away from without a second thought. On the morning of February 14th, Valentine's Day, though Nate was trying hard not to think about that, he woke at 5 like always, but something felt different. There was a sound he couldn't place, a soft whimpering maybe, or scratching. He lay in bed listening, trying to identify the noise that had pulled him from sleep. Finally he got up, pulled on sweatpants and a flannel shirt, padded to the kitchen in his bare feet. He made coffee, looked out the window over the sink at the backyard, where dawn was just starting to grey the edges of the sky. That's when he saw them. At first he thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the early light. Then the shadow moved, and Nate's breath caught in his throat. There was a dog lying in the snow just outside his back door, and huddled against her were several small shapes that had to be puppies. He set down his coffee mug so fast it sloshed onto the counter. His heart was pounding as he moved to the back door, flipped on the porch light, and looked through the glass. The dog was a German shepherd, or had been once. Now she was a skeleton wrapped in matted fur, her ribs visible even through her coat, her eyes half closed against the cold. The puppies, he counted 5 of them, were tiny, pressed against their mother's belly in a desperate pile. None of them were moving much. Nate's hand was on the doorknob before he'd made a conscious decision to open it. The cold air hit him like a slap, and he realized he was still in bare feet, but he didn't care. He knelt in the snow beside the dog, and her eyes opened to look at him. They were brown and deep, and full of something that looked like resignation. "Hey there," he said softly. "Hey, it's okay." She didn't growl or try to move away. She just watched him with those tired eyes while her puppies squirmed weakly against her. One of them was making a sound like a kitten mewing, thin and desperate. Nate reached out slowly, let the mother dog smell his hand. Her nose was dry and cold. She didn't have a collar, no tags, nothing to indicate where she'd come from or how long she'd been out here. Her paws were cracked and bleeding. She'd walked a long way to end up in his backyard. "Okay," Nate said, more to himself than to the dog. "Okay, let's get you inside." He stood up, went back into the house, grabbed the blanket from the couch and an old towel from the bathroom. His mind was racing through possibilities. Call animal control, call a vet, call someone who knew what they were doing, but his body was already moving on instinct. He spread the blanket in the snow, gently scooped up the puppies one by one and placed them on it. They were so small they fit in one hand, their eyes still closed, their bodies cold to the touch. The mother dog tried to stand when she saw him handling her babies, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She collapsed back into the snow with a sound that was almost a sob. "It's okay," Nate told her. "I've got them. I've got you." He wrapped the puppies carefully in the towel, held the bundle against his chest with one arm, then bent down and slid his other arm under the mother dog's chest. She was heavier than he expected, despite how thin she was, maybe 60 pounds of dead weight and exhaustion. He lifted her carefully, cradled her against him, and carried them all inside. Nate kicked the back door shut behind him and stood in his kitchen, dripping melted snow onto the linoleum, his arms full of dying animals, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. The mother dog's breathing was shallow and rapid against his chest. The puppies had gone quiet in their towel bundle, which terrified him more than the whimpering had. He carried them to the spare bedroom and laid the mother dog down on the carpet as gently as he could, then unwrapped the puppies and placed them beside her. She immediately tried to curl around them, but the effort seemed to take everything she had. Her eyes closed, and her breathing grew even more labored. "No," Nate said out loud. "No, you don't get to give up now." He ran to the hallway closet and grabbed every blanket and towel he could find, brought them back and piled them around the dogs. The room was cold, so he cranked up the thermostat and closed the bedroom door to trap the warmth. Then he knelt beside the mother dog and really looked at her for the first time. She was in terrible shape. Her fur was matted with ice and what looked like old blood. Her paws were cracked and raw, some of the pads split open. There was a scar across her muzzle that looked like it had healed badly. Around her neck was a worn collar, faded blue nylon with no tags attached. Someone had owned her once, or at least pretended to. The puppies were in better shape than their mother, but not by much. They were so small, maybe 2 or 3 weeks old at most. Their eyes were still sealed shut, their ears flat against their tiny heads. 2 of them were mostly black, with tan markings. The other 3 were lighter, more tan than black. One of the light-colored ones was significantly smaller than its siblings, barely the size of Nate's palm. He pulled out his phone and searched for emergency vet near Maple Ridge, Michigan. The closest one was in Traverse City, 40 minutes away. He looked at the dog and knew she wouldn't survive the drive. He needed to stabilize her first, warm her up, get some food and water in her if she could take it. He searched how to treat hypothermia in dogs and started reading frantically. Warm, gradually, not too fast. Lukewarm water, warm blankets, monitor breathing. If the dog was conscious, offer small amounts of water. The puppies were a separate problem. At this age, they needed to nurse every 2 to 3 hours, but their mother was too weak. He searched emergency puppy care and felt his stomach drop. He'd need puppy milk replacer, bottles, a heating pad, supplies he didn't have. "Okay," he said to the dogs, to himself. "Okay. We're going to figure this out." He went to the kitchen and filled a bowl with lukewarm water, brought it back and held it near the mother dog's muzzle. She didn't respond at first, then her tongue came out and she took a few weak laps. It was something. It was a start. The puppies had begun to squirm and cry, tiny mewling sounds that cut right through him. They were hungry and cold and searching for their mother, but she couldn't help them. Nate looked at his watch. 6:30. The grocery store wouldn't open until 8. He searched 24-hour stores near me and found a supermart about 15 miles away. They might have something he could use. He hated to leave the dogs alone, but he didn't have a choice. He dragged the space heater from his bedroom and plugged it in near the pile of blankets. He checked the mother dog's water bowl, stroked her head gently. "I'll be back soon," he told her. "Just hold on." The drive to Supermart felt like it took hours, even though it was only 20 minutes. Inside, the store was bright and quiet. Nate went straight to the pet section and started grabbing things off the shelves. Puppy milk replacer, bottles with nipples, a heating pad, a bag of high-quality puppy food that he could maybe soak and mash up for the mother dog, more towels, a soft fleece blanket. He threw it all in his cart and kept moving. The total was over $200. Nate handed over his credit card without hesitation. He drove back faster than he should have, anxiety coiling in his chest. What if he got home and they were already gone? But when he unlocked his front door and hurried to the spare bedroom, they were still there. The mother dog's eyes opened when he came in, and there was something in her gaze that looked almost like relief. The puppies were crying in earnest now, a chorus of desperate hunger. Nate dropped the shopping bags and got to work. He read the instructions on the puppy milk replacer, mixed it according to the directions with warm water, filled one of the tiny bottles. He picked up the smallest puppy and held it in his palm. It weighed almost nothing. He touched the nipple to the puppy's mouth, and at first nothing happened. Then the puppy's mouth opened and closed, searching, and suddenly it latched on. It started sucking with surprising strength, its tiny paws kneading the air. "That's it," Nate whispered. "That's it, little one." He fed all 5 puppies one by one, which took nearly an hour. His back ached from hunching over them, his hands cramped from holding the bottles steady, but when each puppy finished and fell asleep with a full belly, the satisfaction he felt was unlike anything he'd experienced in months. The mother dog watched him the entire time. When he was finished, he soaked some of the puppy food in warm water until it was soft and offered it to her on a shallow plate. She ate slowly, carefully, and kept down about half of it before she laid her head back down. Nate sat on the floor beside them, his back against the wall. He pulled a pillow from his bed and sat against the wall in the spare room, watching the rise and fall of the mother dog's breathing, listening to the soft sounds of the puppies sleeping. The morning sun came through the window and turned the snow in the backyard gold. Somewhere in the middle of watching over these animals he hadn't asked for and didn't know how to save, Nate realized something had shifted. For the first time in 3 months, he wasn't thinking about his divorce or his failures or the empty hours stretching ahead of him. He was thinking about feeding schedules and warming temperatures and whether that smallest puppy was going to make it through the day. He was thinking about something other than himself, and somehow, in that cold spare room with a dying dog and 5 helpless puppies, Nate Kemper felt more alive than he had in years. The first week passed in a blur of feeding schedules and sleepless nights. Nate set alarms on his phone for every 2.5 hours, around the clock, and when they went off, he'd drag himself to the spare room and prepare bottles for 5 hungry puppies. Each feeding took about an hour by the time he'd warmed the milk replacer, fed each pup individually, and stimulated them to eliminate. Then he'd have maybe 90 minutes before the whole cycle started again. He'd never been so tired in his life. But he'd also never felt so necessary. By the 3rd day, he'd started keeping a notebook to track everything. Each puppy got a page with columns for feeding times, amounts consumed, and bathroom success. He weighed them on his kitchen scale every morning and evening, recording their progress in grams. The smallest one, the little tan female, was gaining weight slower than her siblings, which worried him. He started giving her an extra ½ ounce at each feeding, staying up a little longer to make sure she finished it all. The mother dog was recovering, slowly but steadily. She'd eaten more each day, graduated from mashed puppy food to kibble softened with warm water. Her eyes had regained some brightness, and she'd started lifting her head when Nate came into the room. On the 4th morning, she managed to stand on shaky legs and walk 3 steps before lying back down. Nate had felt an absurd surge of pride, like he'd accomplished something monumental. He needed to name her. He couldn't keep thinking of her as the mother dog or the shepherd. She deserved better than that. He spent an evening researching strong female names, warrior names, goddess names. When he found Freya, Norse goddess of love and war, protector and fierce mother, he knew it was right. "What do you think?" he asked her, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside her pile of blankets. "You look like a Freya to me." She gazed at him with those deep brown eyes, and her tail thumped once against the carpet. It was the first time she'd wagged her tail since he'd found her, and the simple gesture made his throat tight. The puppies were harder to name. He resisted at first, telling himself they were temporary, that he'd find homes for them once they were old enough and he shouldn't get attached. But by day 5, when the first puppy opened its eyes and looked at him with unfocused baby blue that would eventually turn brown, he knew the battle was already lost. He named them based on their personalities, which were emerging more each day. The biggest male, one of the dark-colored pups who was always first to the bottle and loudest when hungry, became Titan. His slightly smaller brother, who liked to sleep on his back with his paws in the air, was Scout. The larger of the two tan males, adventurous and always crawling away from the pile, became Ranger. The tan female, who wasn't the runt, sweet-natured and calm, he named Willow. And the smallest, the one he worried about most, the fighter who wouldn't quit despite being half the size of her siblings, he called Ember. Freya watched him handle her babies with increasing trust. By the end of the first week, she'd let him pick them up without so much as a worried glance. She seemed to understand that he was helping, that he was part of her pack now. Sometimes when he sat with them, she'd rest her head on his knee, and he'd stroke her ears while the puppies squirmed and nursed. On day 7, Lauren called. It was evening, around 8, and Nate was sitting on the floor of the spare room with a sleeping puppy in each hand, Ember and Scout, while the others piled against Freya's belly. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he managed to fish it out without disturbing the pups. "Hey, honey," he answered, keeping his voice low. "Dad, hi." Lauren sounded surprised that he'd picked up. He usually let her calls go to voicemail and called back later, when he'd mentally prepared for the conversation. "I was just checking in. How are you?" "I'm good," he said, and realized with some surprise that it was true. "Actually, something happened this week. Something kind of unexpected." "Oh." There was caution in her voice, like she was bracing for bad news. "I found some dogs, a mother and 5 puppies outside my back door. They were in bad shape, nearly frozen, so I've been taking care of them." Silence on the other end. Then, "You found dogs? You're taking care of them? Dad, you've never even had a pet." "I know." He looked down at the puppies in his hands, their tiny bodies warm and trusting. "I know it's strange, but they needed help, and there was no one else around, so I just did what needed doing." "How are they?" "The dogs, I mean. Are they okay?" Something in Lauren's tone had shifted. She sounded genuinely curious, engaged in a way she hadn't been during their usual stilted phone calls. So Nate told her everything. Finding them in the snow, the frantic trip to Supermart, the around-the-clock feedings, the way Freya had looked at him when she first wagged her tail. He told her about Ember being so small, and Titan being such a pig, and Scout sleeping on his back like a cartoon dog. Lauren laughed at that, a real laugh. And Nate couldn't remember the last time he'd heard that sound. It felt like stumbling onto something precious he'd thought was lost forever. "That's amazing, Dad," she said when he finished. "I mean, it sounds exhausting, but amazing. You're basically a puppy nurse." "I guess I am." He shifted Ember carefully to his other hand. She made a small sound in her sleep and settled against his palm. "It's the most tired I've ever been, but I don't mind. They need me, you know. It's been a long time since anything needed me." Another silence, but this one felt different, heavier with things unsaid. "Dad," Lauren said quietly, "we needed you. Bryce and I. We needed you for a long time." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. He'd known it, of course he'd known it, but hearing his daughter say it out loud was different. He closed his eyes and took a breath that hurt going down. "I know," he said. "You did, and I wasn't there. I'm sorry, Lauren. I'm so sorry." "I didn't say that to make you feel bad," she said quickly. "I just meant that maybe this is good for you. Taking care of something, being present for something, even if it's dogs and not people." "Maybe it is," he agreed. "These puppies don't care that I was a terrible father. They just care that I show up with a bottle every few hours." "You weren't terrible," Lauren said, "but there wasn't much conviction in it. You were just absent." "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yeah, Dad, there is." She paused. "A terrible father wouldn't feel bad about it, wouldn't be calling himself terrible. You cared, you just didn't know how to show it. Or you were too busy to show it. I don't know. But maybe you can learn. Maybe taking care of these dogs is practice." The idea settled into his chest, uncomfortable and true. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was practice for being present, for showing up, for caring about something outside his own head. They talked for another 10 minutes, easier conversation than they'd had in years. When they finally hung up, Nate sat in the quiet room with 2 sleeping puppies in his hands and felt something crack open in his chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. By the end of week 2, Nate knew he needed professional help. Freya had regained enough strength to move around the house, though she still tired easily. The puppies were thriving, their eyes fully open now, their ears starting to perk up. They'd more than doubled their birth weight, even little Ember, who was still the smallest, but no longer worryingly so. But Nate had questions he couldn't answer with internet searches, and concerns that kept him awake between feeding times. Freya needed to be examined by a vet. The puppies needed vaccinations. He needed to know if he was doing everything right, or if he was missing something crucial. The problem was that seeking help meant leaving his isolated bubble, meant interacting with people, meant explaining himself and his situation to strangers. He put it off for 3 days, arguing with himself about whether it was really necessary. Then, on Tuesday morning, Titan started sneezing. It was probably nothing, but the thought of something being wrong with one of the puppies made Nate's stomach drop. He picked up his phone and searched for veterinarians in Maple Ridge. There were 2 listings: Maple Ridge Veterinary Clinic and Countryside Animal Hospital. He called the clinic first because it was closer, just 10 minutes from his house. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. Maple Ridge Veterinary. "This is Colleen speaking." The voice was warm and friendly, with a slight northern Michigan accent that softened the consonants. Nate cleared his throat. "Hi, I need to make an appointment. For a dog and some puppies." "Sure thing. Are these existing patients, or is this your first visit with us?" "First visit. I'm new to the area." "Welcome to Maple Ridge, then. Let me get some information from you." There was the sound of typing. "Can I have your name?" "Nate Kemper." "And the dog's name?" "Freya. She's a German Shepherd, and there are 5 puppies, also German Shepherds. They're about 3 weeks old now." More typing, then a pause. 5 puppies at 3 weeks? My goodness. Is Mom nursing them okay? "She was too weak when I found them. I've been bottle feeding, but she's getting stronger. She might be able to nurse them now, but I'm not sure if I should switch them over or keep doing what I'm doing." "When you say you found them," "They were outside my house 2 weeks ago, in the snow. The mother was nearly dead from exposure and starvation. The puppies were hypothermic. I brought them inside, and I've been caring for them since." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Kemper, that's quite a rescue. I'm sure Dr. Pemberton will want to see them as soon as possible. Can you bring them in today?" "Today?" Nate felt a flutter of anxiety. "I mean, yes, I can do that." "How about 2 o'clock? That'll give the doctor time to do a thorough examination." 2 o'clock works. Colleen took the rest of his information, gave him directions to the clinic, even though he'd already looked it up, and told him to bring any medical records he had. He explained that there were no records, that these weren't his dogs originally, that he'd just found them. She was kind about it, told him not to worry, said they'd figure it out together. After he hung up, Nate stood in his kitchen feeling like he'd just committed to something larger than a vet appointment. He was going to load 6 dogs into his car and drive them to a building full of strangers who would ask questions he might not know how to answer. They'd want to know where the dogs came from, whether he planned to keep them, what his long-term plan was. He didn't have answers to any of that. But Titan was still sneezing, and Ember needed to be checked to make sure her slow growth wasn't a sign of something wrong, and Freya deserved real medical care after everything she'd been through. So he spent the morning preparing. He lined a large cardboard box with blankets for the puppies and put it in the back seat of his sedan. He'd let Freya ride in the passenger seat with a towel spread out to protect the upholstery. He gathered his notebook with all the feeding records and weight charts, printed out some of the articles he'd been following about puppy care, made a list of questions he wanted to ask. At 1:30, he loaded everyone into the car. The puppies cried at first, confused by the change in routine, but they settled down once they were all piled together in their box. Freya sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, watching the world go by through the window, like she was trying to memorize the route in case she ever needed to find her way back. The clinic was in a converted house on the edge of downtown Maple Ridge, a cheerful yellow building with a painted sign showing a cat and dog sitting side by side. The parking lot had 4 cars in it. Nate pulled into a space near the door and sat for a moment, gathering his courage. "Okay," he said to Freya, "let's do this." Inside, the clinic smelled like antiseptic and dog shampoo. The waiting room had chairs along 2 walls, a reception desk, and a bulletin board covered in photos of pets and thank you cards. A woman in her early 40s stood behind the desk, her auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail, her scrubs decorated with cartoon paw prints. "You must be Nate," she said, coming around the desk with a smile. "I'm Colleen. Let me help you with that box." She took the puppy box from him before he could protest, peeked inside, and made a sound of pure delight. "Oh, my word, they're precious. Look at those little faces." "This is Freya," Nate said, gesturing to the shepherd at his side. Freya pressed against his leg, nervous in the unfamiliar environment. "She's beautiful." Colleen led them down a hallway to an examination room, set the puppy box on the floor, and gestured for Nate to take a seat in the plastic chair by the wall. "Doctor, Pemberton will be right in. Can I get you some water or coffee?" "I'm fine, thank you." Colleen crouched down to Freya's level, extended her hand slowly. "Hey there, sweetheart. Aren't you a good girl?" Freya sniffed her hand cautiously, then allowed herself to be petted. "She's got good energy for a dog who was nearly dead 2 weeks ago. You must have done something right. I just fed them and kept them warm." "Basic stuff." "Basic stuff that saved 6 lives." Colleen straightened up. "That's not nothing, Nate. You should be proud." Before he could respond, the door opened and a man in his late 50s walked in. He was tall and lean, with silver hair and glasses, wearing a white coat over flannel and jeans. His face had the kind of weathered kindness that came from years of putting scared animals at ease. "Nate Kemper," he extended his hand. "Hugh Pemberton. Colleen tells me you've been running a puppy nursery for the past 2 weeks. They shook hands. Dr. Pemberton's grip was firm and warm. "Something like that," Nate said. "Well, let's see what we're working with here." The vet knelt beside the puppy box and spent a long moment just watching the pups tumble over each other. German shepherds, looks like, 3, 4 weeks old? 3.5 by my count. "And you've been bottle feeding all 5 of them?" "Every 2.5 hours. Dr. Pemberton looked up at him with something like respect. "That's dedication. Most people would have called animal control and let them handle it." "I thought about it," Nate admitted. "But by the time I thought about it, I'd already brought them inside. And then it just seemed like I was already committed, you know." "I do know." The vet lifted Titan out of the box, examined him with practiced efficiency. "This is a healthy pup. Good weight, clear eyes, strong heartbeat. Whatever you're doing, it's working." He went through each puppy one by one, weighing them on a small scale, listening to their hearts, checking their ears and mouths and paws. When he got to Ember, he spent a little longer, his expression thoughtful. "This one's smaller than her siblings. That's Ember. She's been gaining weight slower, so I've been giving her extra at each feeding." "Smart thinking." Dr. Pemberton set her gently back in the box. "She's small, but she's proportional, which is what matters. Some pups are just naturally petite. As long as she keeps gaining steadily, she'll be fine." Then he turned his attention to Freya, and his demeanor shifted slightly. He approached her slowly, speaking in a low voice, letting her sniff his hand before he touched her. When he ran his hands over her body, checking her condition, his jaw tightened. "She's been through it," he said quietly. "Look at these scars. This scar on her muzzle, these marks on her legs. And her paws are still healing from whatever journey brought her to your door." He checked her teeth, her ears, felt along her spine and ribs. She's severely underweight, probably 10 or 15 pounds under what she should be, but her vitals are good. You've done an excellent job nursing her back. What do you think happened to her? Nate asked. Dr. Pemberton was quiet for a moment, stroking Freya's head. My guess? Backyard breeding operation. German shepherds are valuable, especially females with good lines. Someone was probably using her to produce puppies to sell. When she got too worn down, or when she escaped, they didn't bother coming after her. The anger that surged through Nate was unexpected in its intensity. Someone did this to her on purpose, used her like that? Happens more than you'd think. Puppy mills, backyard breeders, people who see dogs as products instead of living creatures. The vet's expression was grim. The collar she's wearing is old and worn. No tags. She's not microchipped, I already checked. Legally, you found her as a stray. If you want to keep her, she's yours. The puppies, too. Nate looked down at Freya, who gazed back at him with those trusting brown eyes. The thought of someone hurting her, using her, discarding her when she was no longer profitable, made his chest tight with rage. I'm keeping her, he said. No question. Good man. Doctor. Pemberton pulled out his prescription pad and started writing. Here's what we need to do. The puppies need their first round of vaccinations at 6 weeks. Bring them back then. Freya needs to be spayed once the pups are fully weaned, probably around 8 weeks. That'll prevent any more unwanted litters, and it's better for her health long term. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing with the feeding schedule. The pups can start transitioning to solid food mixed with formula around 4 weeks. He handed Nate the paper with instructions and appointment dates. At the bottom was a number. That's the cost for today's exam and the upcoming procedures. I know it's not cheap. We can set up a payment plan if you need to. Nate looked at the total and felt a moment of anxiety. It was more than he'd expected, but then he thought about what these dogs had been through, what they'd given him these past 2 weeks. Purpose, structure, a reason to get up in the morning that wasn't just force of habit. I can handle it, he said. Good. And Nate? Doctor, Pemberton's expression softened. What you did, taking them in like that, caring for them when they needed it most, that takes a special kind of person. Thank you for not looking away. 3 days after the vet visit, Colleen showed up at Nate's door with a box of homemade cookies and a folder full of paperwork. He'd just finished the morning feeding routine and was contemplating a nap when the doorbell rang. Freya barked once, a deep protective sound, then went to investigate. Through the window, Nate saw Colleen's cheerful face and felt a mix of pleasure and apprehension. He'd enjoyed meeting her and Dr. Pemberton, but having someone come to his house felt like an intrusion into the private world he'd built with the dogs. Still, he opened the door. Hope I'm not bothering you, Colleen said, holding up the cookie tin. I made extras and thought you might appreciate something homemade. I know you've been busy with the pups. That's kind of you. Colleen followed him into the kitchen, Freya sniffing at her heels with interest. The house was cleaner than it had been before the dogs arrived. Nate had developed a routine of wiping down surfaces and vacuuming daily to keep ahead of the puppy chaos, but it still looked sparse, temporary. Nice place, Colleen said, though there wasn't much to compliment. How are the little ones doing? Growing like weeds. Titan's already trying to climb out of the box. Scout figured out how to bark yesterday, and now they're all doing it. That's wonderful. She set the folder on the kitchen table. Listen, I hope this doesn't feel like I'm overstepping, but I wanted to talk to you about something. Can we sit? Nate gestured to the chairs and they sat across from each other. Through the doorway, he could hear the puppies starting to wake up, making their small, demanding noises. Freya immediately headed toward the spare room to check on them. She's a good mother, Colleen observed. The best. She's been incredible with them, even when she was barely strong enough to stand. Colleen opened the folder and pulled out several printed pages. That's actually related to why I'm here, Doctor. Pemberton mentioned that Freya was likely from a breeding operation, and that got me thinking. We have a serious problem in this area with abandoned dogs, especially in winter. The shelters in Traverse City and Petoskey are both over capacity. There are good people trying to help, but there's no organized network, no real infrastructure. She spread the papers on the table. Nate saw forms, documents, what looked like articles about animal rescue organizations. A few of us have been talking about starting something local. Maple Ridge Rescue Network, we're calling it. Just a volunteer group at first, fostering animals until we can find them homes, coordinating with the shelters, maybe doing some fundraising to help with medical costs. Nothing fancy, but something that could actually make a difference. Nate picked up one of the forms. It was a foster application. And you're here because you want me to be part of this. I'm here because you already are part of it, whether you meant to be or not. Colleen's smile was gentle. Nate, you took in a dying dog and 5 puppies in the middle of winter. You've been caring for them round the clock for 3 weeks. You're exactly the kind of person this network needs. I'm not sure about that. I just did what anyone would do. Most people wouldn't, though. Most people would have made a phone call and gone back to bed. You didn't. She leaned forward slightly. Look, I'm not asking you to commit to anything huge. But once these puppies are adopted, if you'd be willing to foster another dog or 2, just temporarily, until we find them permanent homes, it would help tremendously. Nate looked down at the paperwork. Part of him wanted to say no immediately, to protect the fragile routine he'd built, to keep his world small and manageable. But another part of him, the part that had been slowly waking up over the past 3 weeks, wondered if maybe this was exactly what he needed. Not just caring for these 6 dogs, but being part of something larger, something that mattered. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. Colleen stood to leave, then paused. I should mention, we're having a meeting next Wednesday evening at the clinic. Just a few people who are interested in getting involved. You'd be welcome to come, no pressure, just to hear what we're planning. After she left, Nate sat at the table with the folder in front of him. He opened the cookie tin and found chocolate chip cookies that smelled like his childhood, like the kind of thing a mother would make for her kids coming home from school. He ate one, then another, staring at the foster application without really reading it. That evening his phone rang. It was unusual for anyone to call at 8 o'clock, and when he saw Catherine's name on the screen, his heart gave an uncomfortable lurch. Hello? Nate, hi. I hope I'm not calling too late. Her voice was familiar and strange at the same time, like a song he used to know all the words to. No, it's fine. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. I talked to Lauren today, and she told me about the dogs. I just wanted to call and say that's wonderful. What you're doing. Nate didn't know what to say. They'd barely spoken since the divorce was finalized, their communication limited to brief emails about financial matters or forwarded mail. Hearing her voice talking about something other than paperwork felt surreal. Thank you, he managed. She said you sound different, happier maybe, more engaged. I guess I am. He looked toward the spare room where Freya and the puppies were sleeping. It's hard to be detached when you've got 5 puppies screaming for food every few hours. Catherine laughed, and the sound sent a wave of memory through him. Sunday mornings making pancakes, the kids still in pajamas, Catherine laughing at something Bryce said. When had he stopped paying attention to that laugh? I'm glad, she said. I was worried about you, moving up there all alone. I know it's not my place to worry anymore, but old habits, you know. It's okay. I appreciate it. He paused, then added, How are you doing? I'm good. Actually, I'm better than good. I've been taking pottery classes, started volunteering at the library. It's strange, starting over at 50, but also kind of exciting. That sounds great, Catherine, really. They talked for another few minutes, careful conversation that avoided anything too personal or painful. But when they hung up, Nate felt something shift, not regret exactly, and not hope for reconciliation. More like acceptance. Catherine had moved on, was building a life that made her happy. He was doing the same, in his own stumbling way. The next morning, Nate woke early to Freya barking. It wasn't her usual alert bark, but something more urgent. He threw on clothes and hurried to the spare room to find Iris Kowalski, his elderly neighbor, peering through the back door window. He opened the door, and she looked embarrassed. "I'm so sorry to bother you, Nate. I saw lights on and I could hear puppies crying, and I just got curious. My husband and I used to breed Labrador retrievers years ago, and the sound brought back memories." "It's no trouble," he found himself smiling. "Would you like to meet them?" Iris's face lit up like a child on Christmas morning. "Could I?" He led her to the spare room where the puppies were just waking up, stretching and yawning and tumbling over each other. Freya approached Iris cautiously, and Iris extended her hand for the shepherd to sniff. "She's beautiful," Iris said softly, "and those babies, oh my goodness. Would you like to hold one?" "May I?" Nate picked up Willow, the gentle tan female, and placed her carefully in Iris's arms. The old woman's eyes filled with tears as she cradled the puppy close. "I haven't held a puppy since Chester died," she said. "That was our last lab. He passed 3 years ago, and I told myself I was too old to get another dog, that it wouldn't be fair to the animal. But Lord, I've missed it. The warmth of them. The trust." They sat together on the floor, Iris holding Willow, while Nate bottle-fed the others. She told him about the Labradors she and her late husband had raised, about the joy of watching puppies grow and find their families, about the empty space that appeared in her house after Chester died and never quite filled back in. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "there's a grief that comes with losing a companion animal, but there's also a grief that comes from having the love to give and no one to give it to." The words struck Nate deeply. That's what he'd been feeling these past months, wasn't it? Not just grief over his failed marriage, but grief over having all this capacity to care and no outlet for it. He'd shut himself down, closed himself off, but the love was still there. It just needed somewhere to go. "Iris," he said slowly, "would you want to come by sometimes? Help with the puppies? I could use an extra pair of hands, and it seems like it might do us both some good." Her smile was radiant. "I would love that more than you know." She came by the next day, and the day after that. She taught Nate things she'd learned from years of raising dogs: how to socialize puppies properly, how to read their body language, how to start basic training even at this young age. In return, Nate gave her something to care for again, a reason to leave her empty house and remember what it felt like to be needed. On Wednesday evening, Nate loaded Freya into his car and drove to the veterinary clinic for the meeting Colleen had mentioned. He told himself he was just going to listen, to see what it was about, that he wasn't committing to anything. But in the box on his passenger seat was the completed foster application. The meeting room was small, with a dozen folding chairs arranged in a circle. There were 8 people there when Nate arrived, ranging in age from early 20s to late 60s. Colleen introduced him around a retired teacher named Phyllis, a young couple who ran a farm on the edge of town, a mechanic named Roy, who apparently had a soft spot for pit bulls, others whose names Nate tried to remember. Dr. Pemberton led the meeting, talking about the scope of the problem, the number of animals that needed help, the resources they'd need to build an effective network. People shared their own experiences with rescue animals, their frustrations with the current system, their hopes for what they could create together. When Dr. Pemberton asked if anyone wanted to share their story, Nate found himself talking. He told them about finding Freya and the puppies, about the past 3 weeks, about how caring for them had given him something he didn't know he was missing. His voice cracked a little when he talked about Iris coming by to help, about his daughter calling to ask about the dogs, about feeling like he was finally doing something that mattered. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then Colleen spoke up. "That's why we're doing this," she said. "Not just for the animals, though they matter tremendously, but for us too. for what happens when we choose to care about something outside ourselves. By the end of the meeting, Nate had signed up to be a foster volunteer. He'd committed to taking in dogs once the puppies were placed, to being part of something larger than his own small world. Walking out to his car with Freya at his side, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like he belonged somewhere. The package arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 weeks after Nate had found the dogs. He'd been expecting some supplies he'd ordered, online puppy training pads and a new bag of food, so when he saw the box on his porch, he thought nothing of it at first. Then he noticed the return address, Lauren's apartment in Ann Arbor. Inside was a photo album, the kind with the clear plastic sleeves that protected pictures from fingerprints and time. The binding was worn, the cover slightly faded, and when Nate opened it, he recognized it immediately. This was the album Catherine had kept of the kid's childhood, the one that lived on the bookshelf in the living room of the house that wasn't his anymore. A note was tucked inside the front cover, written in Lauren's careful handwriting. "Dad, Mum helped me make a copy of this for you. I thought you should have these. The dogs sound wonderful. Bryce and I are thinking about visiting in a couple weeks if that's okay. I'd like to meet Freya and the puppies. And I'd like to see you. Love, Lauren." Nate sat down at the kitchen table and turned the pages slowly. There was Bryce, as a baby, impossibly small, wrapped in a blue blanket in Catherine's arms. Lauren at 2, covered in mud from playing in the backyard. Both kids on their first day of kindergarten, missing front teeth and wearing backpacks bigger than they were. Birthday parties, Halloween costumes, Christmas mornings. He was in some of the photos, standing in the background of Bryce's 5th birthday party, checking his watch. Sitting on the couch during a holiday gathering, laptop open on his knees while the kids played with their presents. At Lauren's middle school graduation, there but not there, his expression distant even as he smiled for the camera. But most painful were the photos where he should have been and wasn't. The elementary school play where Catherine sat alone in the audience. The father-daughter dance where Lauren had gone with her grandfather instead. Bryce's high school football games where Catherine stood on the sidelines, bundled in a coat, cheering by herself. Nate closed the album and put his head in his hands. The evidence was right there in plastic-wrapped pages. Year after year of absence, of choosing work over presence, of believing he had more time, that he could make it up later, that providing financially was the same as showing up. He'd told himself he was building a future for his family. But what he'd really been doing was building an excuse to avoid the messy, complicated work of being present. It was easier to answer emails than to help with homework. Easier to take business calls than to coach Little League. Easier to stay late at the office than to sit through a piano recital. And now his kids were grown, and those moments were gone forever. He couldn't get them back. He couldn't redo their childhoods or repair the damage his absence had caused. All he could do was acknowledge it, own it, and try to do better going forward. Freya came into the kitchen and rested her head on his knee. She always seemed to know when he needed comfort, this dog who'd been through so much worse than he had, but still found the capacity to care. He stroked her ears and let himself cry for the first time since the divorce. Not quiet tears, but real crying, the kind that came from deep in his chest where he'd been storing grief and regret for years. When he finally stopped, wrung out and exhausted, he picked up his phone and called Lauren. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, Dad. I got the album," he said. His voice was rough. "Thank you for sending it. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see it. Mum thought it might be too painful. It is painful. But I needed to see it. I needed to really look at what I missed, what I chose to miss." He took a breath. "Lauren, I'm so sorry. I know I've said that before, but looking at those pictures, seeing all the times I wasn't there, I just need you to know how deeply sorry I am." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I know you are, Dad. I've always known you loved us. You just didn't know how to show it, or you were too scared to show it." I don't know. I was scared, he admitted, of failing at it. Your mother was so natural with you kids, so good at all of it. I felt like I was always doing it wrong, so I just stopped trying. I told myself work was what I was good at, that providing for you was how I showed love. But it wasn't enough, was it? No, Lauren said softly. It wasn't. We needed you, Dad, not your paycheck. You. I know that now. I'm trying to learn how to be different, how to show up. These dogs have been teaching me. Strange as that sounds. Every few hours they need something from me, and I can't put it off or delegate it. I just have to be there. And you know what? I'm good at it. I can be present when I choose to be. I believe you. And Dad, that's why I want to visit. Not to punish you for the past, but to see if we can build something new. Bryce feels the same way. He's been talking about driving up from Austin in a few months. I'd like that, Nate said. I'd like that very much. They talked about logistics. She could come up the weekend after next, stay for 2 nights if that worked for him. He assured her it was more than fine, that he'd get the spare bedroom properly set up now that the puppies had graduated to a larger enclosure in the living room. She laughed at that, the easy laugh that reminded him of when she was little. After they hung up, Nate looked around his rental house with fresh eyes. It still looked temporary, half lived in, but that could change. He could make it feel like a home, at least for however long he was here. And wherever he ended up next, he could do better. He could be better. The next morning, he drove to the hardware store for paint and supplies. The spare bedroom needed work if Lauren was going to stay in it. While he was there, he ran into Dr. Pemberton in the lumber aisle, examining 2x4s. Nate, the vet said warmly. Growing like crazy. Titan is already trying to escape any enclosure I put him in. I'm building a proper puppy pen this week. That's what I like to hear. Dr. Pemberton smiled. You settling into Maple Ridge okay? I know it's not the most exciting place. Actually, I'm settling in better than I expected, better than anywhere I've lived in a long time. They talked for a few minutes about the rescue network, about the first foster dog that was coming available, a senior beagle whose owner had passed away. Nate found himself volunteering to take the beagle once the puppies were adopted, surprised by how natural the offer felt. Can I buy you a coffee? Dr. Pemberton asked. There's a place just down the street. Nate almost said no, out of habit, then caught himself. This was exactly the kind of thing he used to do. Decline invitations, avoid social connection, keep people at arm's length so he could get back to whatever task was waiting for him. But there was no task waiting, just an empty house and dogs who were probably sleeping off their breakfast anyway. Sure, he said, I'd like that. They sat in a corner booth at the Coffee Cup diner, drinking black coffee and talking the way men do around subjects rather than directly at them. Dr. Pemberton mentioned his own divorce, years ago now, and the way it had forced him to rebuild his life from scratch. How he'd thrown himself into his work, into the clinic, into helping animals, because they were easier than helping himself. It took me a long time to figure out that the work wasn't enough, he said, that I needed connection, community, purpose beyond just my job. The rescue network has been part of that for me. And meeting folks like you, people who care enough to act, that reminds me why this matters. Nate told him about the photo album, about seeing his absence documented so clearly, about his daughter's planned visit. The vet listened without judgment, nodding in understanding. The thing about mistakes, Doctor, Pemberton said, is that we can't undo them, but we can learn from them. And we can make different choices going forward. Sounds like that's what you're doing. I'm trying. Some days I'm not sure I know how. None of us really know how. We just keep showing up and doing the next right thing. That's all any of us can do. They parted ways in the parking lot with plans to meet up again, maybe grab dinner sometime. Nate drove home feeling lighter than he had in months, maybe years. He was making friends. He was repairing relationships with his kids. He was building something that mattered, one puppy feeding and one honest conversation at a time. That evening, Iris came by to help with the puppies' dinner. They'd developed a routine where she'd hold each pup while Nate prepared their food, talking to them in the gentle voice she'd probably used with her own children years ago. The puppies loved her, climbing all over her lap, licking her hands, falling asleep against her shoulder. "You know," she said as Scout dozed in her arms, "I've been thinking about what happens when these little ones get adopted. You're going to foster more dogs, right? That's the plan. Well, I'd like to help with that too, if you'll have me. I'm good with the scared ones, the ones who've been through trauma. I've got patience and time, and it would mean the world to me to be useful again." "Iris, you're already useful. You've been a godsend these past couple weeks." She smiled at him, her eyes bright. "We're helping each other, Nate. That's what community is. That's what matters." He thought about that after she left, while he was cleaning up puppy messes and preparing for the late-night feeding. Community, connection, showing up for each other. These were things he'd taken for granted in his old life, things he'd assumed would always be there without any effort on his part. Now he understood that relationships required tending, that presence was a choice you made over and over, that building a life worth living meant being vulnerable enough to let people in. The puppies were 5 weeks old now, just a few weeks away from being ready for adoption. The thought of letting them go hurt more than Nate had expected, but he knew it was part of the process. They'd go to good homes, families who would love them and care for them. And then he'd make space for the next animal who needed help, and the next, and the next. He was building something here in Maple Ridge, something real and lasting. Not a perfect life, but an honest one. Not without pain or regret, but with purpose and connection and the daily choice to show up. And for now, for the first time in longer than he could remember, that was enough. The morning Lauren was supposed to arrive, Nate woke early to find an envelope on his doormat. Not in the mailbox, not taped to the door, but slipped underneath it during the night while he and Freya slept. The envelope was plain white, no return address, his name written in blue ink across the front in careful block letters. Freya sniffed at it suspiciously when he picked it up. Something in her body language changed, her ears went back, her tail dropped, and she let out a low warning growl that Nate had never heard from her before. "What is it, girl?" He tore open the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of notebook paper folded in thirds. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, neat and controlled. "Mr. Kemper, you don't know me, but I know who you are and what you've been doing. I need to tell you about the dog you found. Her name is actually Heidi, and she belongs to a man named Frank Dutton, who runs a breeding operation 2 towns over in Clearwater. He's been looking for her since she disappeared 6 weeks ago. She's valuable to him because she has champion bloodlines and produces quality puppies he sells for a lot of money. I worked for Frank briefly, and I couldn't stand what I saw. Dogs kept in small kennels, bred every heat cycle until they were used up. Heidi was one of the worst cases. She'd had at least 4 or 5 litters before this one, maybe more. When she got pregnant again and started looking weak, I knew he'd either work her to death or put her down when she couldn't produce anymore. So I helped her escape. I opened her kennel one night and led her to the woods. I'd been watching your house, saw your lights on late at night, and thought you might be someone who'd help. I'm sorry I put you in this position without asking, but I couldn't let her go back there, and I couldn't keep her myself. Frank has been asking around about her. He knows she was pregnant and he wants those puppies. He's offered a reward for information. So far nobody knows where she is, but Clearwater is a small place, and word travels. He has a bad temper, and he doesn't like losing things he considers his property. I can't tell you who I am, because I'm afraid of what he'd do if he found out I helped her. But I needed you to know what you're dealing with. That dog chose you to trust. Please don't let her down. A friend." Nate read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking more with each pass. Freya pressed against his leg, still tense, still sensing something wrong. He looked down at her and thought about everything the letter implied. 6 weeks ago, heavily pregnant and starving, she'd travelled God knows how far to escape. She'd given birth in the cold, kept her puppies alive somehow, and made it to his doorstep on sheer determination and luck. And somewhere out there was a man who considered her property, who wanted her back, who had a bad temper and a habit of tracking down things he'd lost. Nate's first instinct was to call the police, but what would he tell them? A dog showed up at my house and now someone says she's stolen? Legally, he didn't know where he stood. If Dutton could prove ownership, would they take Freya back? Would they take the puppies? The thought of Freya going back to that life, of the puppies being sold off to fund more cruelty, made Nate's stomach turn. But the thought of breaking the law, of being confronted by an angry man with a financial stake in these animals, made his hands shake. He pulled out his phone and called Dr. Pemberton. It was barely 7 in the morning, but the vet answered on the 3rd ring, his voice alert despite the early hour. "Nate? Everything okay? I need your advice. Something's happened." He read the letter aloud, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his chest. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end. "Okay," Dr. Pemberton said finally. "First thing, don't panic. Second thing, Freya is not going back to that situation. I don't care what the legal technicalities are, but if he can prove she's his, he'd have to prove ownership. Does she have a microchip?" "No, I checked when you brought her in. Does she have registration papers?" "Unlikely for a backyard breeder." "Does he have proof she was stolen rather than abandoned?" "Even less likely." The vet's voice was firm. "What he has is a dog that was in such bad condition when you found her that any reasonable person would conclude she'd been abandoned or escaped due to neglect." "So what do I do?" "You document everything. Take photos of Freya's condition when you found her. Do you have any?" "I took some that first day, just to track her recovery." "Perfect. You document her scars, her underweight condition, her paw injuries. You have my medical records showing she was severely malnourished. You establish a paper trail showing that you found a stray dog in distress and provided care. Then you file a report with Animal Control about a suspected breeding operation in Clearwater. Won't that tip him off that I have her? Possibly, but it also puts him on the defensive. If he's running an operation that violates animal welfare laws, he's not going to want attention from authorities. And if he does come looking, you'll have already established yourself as the legal finder of an abandoned animal." Nate absorbed this, his mind racing through scenarios. "There's something else. My daughter is coming to visit today. She's driving up from Ann Arbor. If this Dutton guy is asking around, if people start connecting the dogs to my address, then we move faster than he does, Doctor." Pemberton's tone shifted to something more urgent. "I have a colleague, Greta Kowalski. She's a lawyer who does animal welfare cases pro bono. Let me call her, get her take on this. In the meantime, you take those photos, write down everything you remember about finding Freya, and gather all your medical records. We build your case before he has a chance to build his." "Hugh, I'm scared." The admission came out before Nate could stop it. "Not just for me, but for Freya. For the puppies. They've been through so much already." "I know, but you're not alone in this. The rescue network we're building, we look out for each other. And we don't let innocent animals suffer because someone views them as merchandise." He paused. "Do you have somewhere the dogs could go if you needed to get them out of the house quickly?" "Iris, my neighbor, she'd take them in a heartbeat." "Good. Keep that option in mind. I'm going to make some calls. You sit tight, and I'll be in touch within the hour." After they hung up, Nate stood in his kitchen holding the letter, trying to process everything. He'd rescued a dog, or thought he had. Now it turned out he might have stolen one, depending on how you looked at it. He was potentially in legal trouble. He might be confronted by an angry man with a financial interest in the animals he'd come to love. His daughter was driving up here today. walking into a situation he didn't fully understand yet. But one thing was absolutely clear. Freya was not going back. The puppies were not going to be sold to fund more suffering. Whatever legal or personal risk that meant for him, he'd accept it. Some things were worth standing up for, worth fighting for, even when you were scared. Freya leaned against him, and he knelt down to her level, holding her face gently in his hands. Her brown eyes looked into his with complete trust, the kind of trust he'd spent his whole life trying to earn from the people he loved and failing. This dog, who'd been hurt and used and discarded, trusted him completely. He would not betray that. "It's going to be okay," he told her. "I promise you, it's going to be okay." His phone rang. Dr. Pemberton, calling back sooner than expected. "Greta can meet with you this afternoon at 2. She wants to see all your documentation, and she's going to walk you through filing a formal complaint with animal control. She's also going to draft a statement establishing you as Freya's legal owner through finder's rights and abandonment." "That fast?" "That fast. She takes this stuff seriously, Nate. She's helped shut down 3 puppy mills in northern Michigan over the past 5 years. If Dutton's running the kind of operation your letter suggests, she'll make sure he faces consequences." "Okay." Nate took a breath. "Okay. Good. One more thing. You should probably let Lauren know what's going on. She's an adult. She deserves to know what she's walking into." "You're right. I'll call her." He did, catching Lauren just as she was loading her car in Ann Arbor. He explained everything as calmly as he could, the letter, the potential complications, the legal consultation that afternoon. He expected her to be angry or scared, maybe to cancel her visit. Instead, she was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised him. "Dad, I'm still coming. Actually, I'm glad I'm coming. You shouldn't have to deal with this alone. Lauren, if things get complicated, then they get complicated. These are your dogs now, Dad. This matters to you. Which means it matters to me." Her voice was firm. "I'll be there in 3 hours. We'll figure this out together." After they hung up, Nate stood in his kitchen with tears in his eyes for the second time that week. His daughter, who had every reason to keep her distance, who he'd failed so many times, was driving 3 hours to stand with him in a situation that could get messy, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Maybe he really was building something new. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. He spent the rest of the morning documenting everything, taking photos, writing detailed notes about finding Freya and the puppies. When Lauren arrived just before noon, she hugged him tight and immediately went to meet the dogs. Freya, who was usually cautious with strangers, walked right up to her and pressed her head into Lauren's hand. "She's beautiful, Dad," Lauren said softly. "They all are." "They are," Nate agreed, "and I'm not letting anyone take them." Lauren looked at him, and there was something like pride in her eyes. "Good, then let's make sure that doesn't happen." Greta Kowalski turned out to be Iris's niece, a fact that emerged within the first 5 minutes of their meeting at the veterinary clinic. She was in her mid-40s, with steel-grey hair cut short, and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd seen too much cruelty to be shocked by anything anymore. She spread Nate's documentation across Dr. Pemberton's desk and studied it with the intensity of someone preparing for battle. Lauren sat beside Nate, her presence steady and reassuring. She'd spent the lunch hour playing with the puppies, and Nate had watched her fall in love with them the same way he had. Especially Ember, the smallest one, who'd curled up in Lauren's lap and fallen asleep with complete trust. "This is good," Greta said, tapping the photos. "Very good. These images show clear evidence of neglect and abuse, the scarring, the malnutrition, the condition of her paws. No responsible owner would allow an animal to deteriorate like this." "So legally, she's mine?" Nate asked. "Legally, it's complicated. Michigan law regarding found animals is murky. But what we can establish is that you found a stray dog in life-threatening condition and provided emergency care. You've documented everything meticulously. You've incurred significant veterinary expenses. And most importantly, The dog was found without identification, collar tags, or microchip. She looked up at him. If Dutton wants to claim her, he'll need to prove ownership. And if he does that, he'll also need to explain why his property was starving to death 20 miles from his address. What about the puppies? The puppies were born in your care, under your roof. That makes the ownership question even murkier for him. Greta pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm filing a formal complaint with Animal Control regarding suspected animal cruelty at Dutton's address. That triggers an investigation. Second, I'm drafting an affidavit establishing your rights as the finder of an abandoned animal. Third, we're going to be proactive about getting ahead of this. Meaning what? Meaning we contact Dutton directly before he contacts you. We establish the narrative on our terms. She saw Nate's expression and added, I'll handle the communication. You don't have to face him. No. The word came out firm, surprising even himself. I should be part of it. These are my dogs. I'm not hiding. Lauren reached over and squeezed his hand. Greta studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right, but we do it my way, in a controlled environment with witnesses. I'll arrange a meeting at the sheriff's office in Clearwater. Official setting, law enforcement present, everything documented. We present our case, show him the evidence of Freya's condition, and make it clear that pursuing this will only bring unwanted attention to his operation. You think he'll back down? Dr. Pemberton asked. People like Dutton are bullies. They rely on others being too scared or too poor to fight back. When you stand up to them with evidence and legal backing, they often fold. Greta's expression hardened. And if he doesn't fold, we bury him in animal welfare violations until he wishes he'd walked away. Over the next 2 days, things moved quickly. The animal control investigation began with an inspector visiting Dutton's property. Greta filed the formal complaint with detailed allegations. The local newspaper, a small weekly publication, ran a story about the growing concern over backyard breeding operations in the area. Nate's name wasn't mentioned, but the timing was deliberate. Lauren extended her visit, calling her principal to explain she needed a few personal days. She and Nate fell into an easy rhythm. She'd help with the morning puppy feeding. They'd have coffee and talk, really talk, about things they'd avoided for years. She told him about the loneliness she'd felt growing up, about watching other kids with fathers who showed up, about learning to stop expecting him to be there. He listened without defending himself, without making excuses, just acknowledging the hurt he'd caused. I don't know how to make up for all those years, he said one morning while they watched the puppies play in the living room enclosure. You can't make up for them, Dad, but you can do better going forward. That's what you're already doing. She picked up Ember, who'd wandered over to investigate her shoelaces. These dogs needed you, and you showed up. Every few hours, every day, no matter how tired you were. That's the father I needed when I was little, the one who just showed up. I'm trying to learn how. It doesn't come naturally to me. Maybe not, but you're doing it anyway, and that matters. Bryce called that evening, and for the first time in years, Nate told his son the whole truth. About the divorce, about feeling lost, about finding the dogs, and how caring for them had given him purpose again. About the legal situation developing with Dutton. Bryce listened without interrupting, and when Nate finished, his son was quiet for a long moment. Dad, I've been angry at you for a long time. I know. You have every right to be. Let me finish. I've been angry because I felt like you chose work over us, over Mom, over everything that mattered. And you did. But I'm starting to understand that you were probably running from something. Fear, maybe. Fear of failing at the things that really mattered. That's exactly what it was, Nate said quietly. The thing is, you're not running anymore. You're standing your ground for these dogs, even though it's scary and complicated. That's growth, Dad. That's change. Bryce paused. I'm proud of you. I haven't said that in a long time, maybe ever, but I'm saying it now. Nate had to set down the phone for a moment to compose himself. When he picked it back up, his voice was rough. Thank you, son. That means more than you know. I'm going to try to get up there next month. I want to meet Freya and see this new life you're building. After they hung up, Lauren hugged him. That was good, what just happened. That was really good. On Wednesday morning, Greta called. She'd arranged the meeting with Dutton for Friday afternoon at the sheriff's office in Clearwater. He'd agreed to come, though he'd been hostile on the phone. The sheriff himself would be present, along with an animal control officer and a representative from the prosecutor's office. It's going to be tense, Greta warned. He's not happy about the investigation or the newspaper attention, but that works in our favor. He's on the defensive. Thursday night, Nate couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to Freya breathe in her spot beside his mattress, thinking about the next day. What if Dutton had documentation he didn't know about? What if the law sided with ownership over welfare? What if he lost Freya and the puppies after everything? Lauren, sleeping in the spare room, must have heard him moving around because she appeared in his doorway around 2 in the morning. Can't sleep either, she asked. Too much going through my head. Want some tea? We can sit up and worry together. They made chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house. The puppies were asleep in their enclosure, a pile of contentment and trust. Freya had followed them from the bedroom and now lay under the table, her head on Nate's foot. What if we lose? Nate asked. Then we fight harder. We appeal, we get more lawyers involved, we make so much noise that he can't ignore it. Lauren's jaw was set in determination that reminded him of her mother. But we're not going to lose, Dad. We have the evidence, we have the truth, and we have each other. When did you get so strong? I learned from Mom, and maybe a little from you, even if you weren't around as much as you should have been. You taught me that some things are worth working for, worth sacrificing for. You just had your priorities wrong back then, but you've got them right now. Friday morning dawned cold and bright. Nate fed the puppies with Lauren's help, trying to keep his hands steady. Iris came over to watch the dogs while they were gone, and she hugged him tight before they left. You give that man hell, she said fiercely. My Greta doesn't lose these cases, and she's not going to start now. The drive to Clearwater took 40 minutes. Dr. Pemberton met them at the sheriff's office, and Colleen came too, offering moral support. The building was small and institutional, with fluorescent lights and tile floors that echoed when you walked. A deputy led them to a conference room where Greta was already setting up, arranging documents and photos in neat stacks. 10 minutes later, Frank Dutton arrived. He was a big man, probably 6'2" and heavy through the shoulders, with thinning hair and a red face that suggested high blood pressure or barely controlled anger. He walked into the conference room like he owned it, his eyes scanning the assembled group with obvious contempt. When his gaze landed on Nate, something predatory flickered across his face. You're the one who's got my dog, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm the one who saved a dying dog and her puppies, Nate replied, keeping his voice steady. Whether she was yours is debatable. Dutton started toward him, but Sheriff Garrison, a solid man in his 60s with a no-nonsense expression, stepped between them. That's enough. Everyone sit down. We're going to discuss this like civilized people, or Mr. Dutton, you can leave and we'll proceed without you. They sat on opposite sides of the table. Dutton's lawyer, a nervous-looking young man with a briefcase, sat beside his client and looked like he wished he was anywhere else. Greta remained standing, and when she began presenting the evidence of Freya's condition when Nate found her, her voice was calm but relentless. The photos were damning. Freya's emaciated body, her bleeding paws, her matted fur, the veterinary records showing severe malnutrition and signs of repeated breeding. The timeline establishing that she'd been found 20 miles from Dutton's address, in life-threatening condition, with no identification. Dutton's face grew redder with each piece of evidence. That dog is worth $5,000. She's got champion bloodlines. Those puppies are my property. Then explain, Greta said coldly, how your property ended up dying in the snow with 5 newborn puppies. Explain the scars, the malnutrition, the evidence of chronic neglect. Explain why, if she was so valuable, you didn't microchip her or keep better track of her. She got loose. Dogs get loose. 20 miles away. Heavily pregnant. Starving to death. Greta slid a document across the table. This is the preliminary report from Animal Control's inspection of your property. Multiple dogs in undersized kennels, inadequate food and water, lack of veterinary care. You're looking at animal cruelty charges, Mr. Dutton. Multiple counts. The room was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Dutton's lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in his ear. Nate sat perfectly still, Lauren's hand gripping his under the table, and waited to see if justice would prevail, or if he'd have to fight even harder for the family he'd found in the snow. Dutton's lawyer whispered more urgently now, his hand on his client's arm, trying to pull him back from whatever edge he was approaching. But Dutton shook him off, his face gone from red to nearly purple. "You can't prove any of that," he said, jabbing a finger at the documents. "You can't prove those dogs weren't properly cared for, and that female is mine. I have bills of sale for her parents, documentation of her bloodline. She's registered property." "Then produce the documentation," Greta said calmly. "Show us the registration papers. Show us the microchip records. Show us any evidence that you properly cared for this animal." Dutton's lawyer put his briefcase on the table and started rifling through it, pulling out papers with shaking hands. He laid out several documents, what looked like purchase receipts from years ago, some kind of pedigree chart, a faded photocopy of breeding records. "This is Heidi," Dutton said, pointing to a name on one of the papers. "Registered German Shepherd, born 2019, purchased by me in 2020. That's my dog." Greta examined the papers without touching them, then looked at Sheriff Garrison. "These documents show he purchased a German Shepherd female in 2020. They don't prove this is the same dog. There's no microchip verification, no current photos, no veterinary records establishing a chain of care." "She's got the same markings," Dutton insisted. "Same coloring, same build. It's her." "German Shepherds often have similar markings, Doctor." Pemberton spoke up for the first time. "Without a microchip or DNA test, you can't definitively prove identity. And even if you could, these documents also don't explain how she ended up in the condition Mr. Kemper found her in. I told you." She got loose. She was pregnant, probably disoriented, wandered off. 6 weeks before Mr. Kemper found her. Greta's eyebrow raised. "You're saying she survived in the wild for 6 weeks while heavily pregnant, gave birth alone, and then nearly died of starvation, and you never reported her missing? Never filed a lost pet report with any local shelter or police department?" Dutton's jaw worked, but no words came out. His lawyer looked like he was about to be sick. Sheriff Garrison leaned forward. "Mr. Dutton, I've seen the preliminary report from Animal Control. What they found at your property is concerning. Multiple dogs in poor conditions, breeding records showing females bred every heat cycle, lack of basic veterinary care. Even if we could establish that this specific dog came from your property, I'm not sure I'd want to return her there. You can't just steal a man's property because you don't like how he runs his business." "We're not stealing anything," Nate said, his voice cutting through the room. He'd been quiet until now, letting Greta and the officials handle the legal arguments, but something in Dutton's tone, the casual way he called Freya property, the complete absence of concern for her well-being, made something snap inside him. "I found a dying animal and her babies in the snow outside my house," Nate continued, standing up slowly. "I didn't know where she came from. I didn't know if she belonged to anyone. All I knew was that if I didn't help her right then, she would die. So I brought her inside. I fed her. I warmed her up. I bottle-fed 5 newborn puppies every few hours for weeks because she was too weak to nurse them." He stepped closer to the table, his hands steady now, his voice firm. "I've spent hundreds of dollars on vet bills and supplies. I've lost sleep. I've rearranged my entire life around keeping those animals alive and healthy. And you know what? I'd do it again. Because she's not property, Mr. Dutton. She's a living creature who feels pain and fear and love. And those puppies didn't ask to be born into whatever situation you created. They're innocent." "That's real touching," Dutton said with a sneer. "But it doesn't change the fact that she's mine, and I want her back, along with the puppies." "The puppies are 6 weeks old," Dr. Pemberton said. "They're still nursing. Separating them from their mother now would be detrimental to their development." "I know how to wean puppies, Doc. I've been breeding dogs for 15 years. Breeding them or exploiting them," Greta's voice was sharp as glass, "because there's a difference, and from what the animal control report shows, you've been doing the latter." The prosecutor's representative, a woman named Paula, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke up. "Mr. Dutton, I'm going to be direct with you. Based on the preliminary investigation, my office is prepared to file animal cruelty charges. If you push this ownership claim, if you make us go through a lengthy legal process, we're going to pursue those charges aggressively. Every dog on your property will be seized and examined. Your breeding operation will be shut down pending investigation. And if we find what I think we're going to find, you'll be facing significant fines and possible jail time." She let that sink in, then continued. "Or you can walk away from this one dog and her puppies. You can agree to a consent order improving conditions for the animals you have. You can cooperate with animal control to bring your operation into compliance with state regulations. That's your choice." Dutton's lawyer was whispering frantically now. The room fell silent except for the sound of his urgent, hushed words. Nate watched Dutton's face, watched the calculation happening behind his eyes. This wasn't about the dog anymore, if it ever had been. This was about power, about winning, about not backing down. "I could sue," Dutton said. "Civil court, claim damages for stolen property." "You could try," Greta said. "But you'd lose. And it would cost you far more in legal fees than any dog is worth. Plus, it would keep the spotlight on your breeding operation for months while we built our case. Is that really what you want?" Lauren's hand found Nate's and squeezed hard. He could feel his heart pounding, could feel the weight of everything riding on this moment. Freya's future, the puppies' futures, his own future, the life he was trying to build, the man he was trying to become. Dutton's lawyer pulled him aside, and they had a heated, whispered conversation in the corner of the room. Nate watched, trying to read their body language, trying to guess which way this would go. Sheriff Garrison caught his eye and gave him a small nod, as if to say, "Hang in there." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dutton and his lawyer came back to the table. Dutton's face was still red, his jaw clenched so tight Nate could see the muscles jumping, but something in his posture had changed, something had given way. "Fine," Dutton spat. "Keep the damn dog, keep the puppies. But I want it in writing that I'm not admitting to anything. I'm voluntarily releasing any claim to the animal because I'm a reasonable man who doesn't want unnecessary legal trouble." "We can do that," Greta said smoothly. She was already pulling out papers, already prepared for this outcome. The papers took 20 minutes to prepare and sign. Greta worked with methodical precision, making sure every word was exactly right, every clause ironclad. Dutton signed with angry, slashing strokes, his lawyer looking relieved that it was over. The agreement stated that Frank Dutton voluntarily relinquished any claim to the German Shepherd female and her 5 offspring, currently in the care of Nate Kemper, with no admission of wrongdoing on either side. But there was more. Paula, the prosecutor's representative, had added a consent order that Dutton also had to sign. It required him to allow unannounced inspections of his breeding facility for the next 2 years, to limit the number of litters each female could produce annually, to provide documented veterinary care for all animals, and to maintain adequate housing and nutrition standards. Failure to comply would result in immediate seizure of all animals and criminal charges. Dutton read through it, his face getting redder with each paragraph. This is government overreach. This is harassment. This is the deal, Paula said flatly. Sign it or face charges now. Your choice. He signed. The pen nearly went through the paper. When all the documents were completed, notarized by the sheriff's secretary and distributed to the relevant parties, Sheriff Garrison stood up. Mr. Dutton, you're free to go. I strongly suggest you take this as an opportunity to evaluate your business practices. We'll be watching. Dutton stood, grabbed his copies of the papers, and headed for the door without another word. His lawyer scurried after him, briefcase in hand. Just before leaving, Dutton turned back and locked eyes with Nate. You think you're some kind of hero, he said, saving one dog, but you don't know anything about this business. You don't know what it takes. I know it doesn't take cruelty, Nate replied. I know it doesn't take treating living things like merchandise. Dutton sneered, but there was something defeated in his eyes. He'd lost, and he knew it. He walked out, and the door closed behind him with a solid click that felt like the end of something. The room was silent for a moment. Then Lauren let out a breath she'd been holding and hugged Nate so tight he could barely breathe. You did it, Dad. You actually did it. Greta was gathering her papers, a satisfied smile on her face. That went better than I expected. He caved faster than most of them do. The threat of criminal charges and public attention usually does it. Will he actually comply with the consent order? Nate asked. We'll make sure of it. Animal control will be monitoring him closely. If he steps out of line, we'll come down on him hard. She handed Nate his copy of the release agreement. This makes it official. Freya and her puppies are legally yours. No one can challenge that now. Dr. Pemberton shook Nate's hand, his grip warm and firm. You stood up for her. A lot of people wouldn't have. They'd have been too scared or too worried about the hassle. But you stood your ground. I couldn't let her go back there, Nate said simply. Not after everything she survived to get away from it. Sheriff Garrison walked them out to the parking lot. The afternoon sun was bright on the snow, almost blinding after the fluorescent lights inside. Mr. Kemper, I want you to know that what you did matters. We get a lot of cases where people look the other way, don't want to get involved. You got involved. You made a difference. Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate that. If Dutton gives you any trouble, any at all, you call me directly. He handed Nate a business card. I mean it. He signed those papers. But men like him don't always let go gracefully. The drive back to Maple Ridge was quiet at first. Nate kept replaying the confrontation in his head, Dutton's anger, the moment when he'd finally backed down. Lauren sat beside him, looking out the window at the passing landscape of snow and bare trees. You were brave in there, she said finally, standing up to him like that. I've never seen you like that before. I've never felt like that before. Like I had something worth fighting for, something that mattered more than my own comfort or convenience. The dogs matter to you. They do. But it's more than that. He glanced at her. This whole thing, taking care of them, building this rescue network, reconnecting with you and Bryce, it's shown me what I've been missing, what I gave up when I chose work over everything else. I don't want to be that person anymore. You're not that person anymore, Dad. That's what I've been trying to tell you. When they pulled into Nate's driveway, Iris was on the front porch before the engine was even off. Well, what happened? Don't keep an old woman in suspense. We won, Lauren called out. The dogs are ours. It's official. Iris clapped her hands together and did a little dance that made them both laugh. I knew it. I knew Greta would tear him apart. Come inside, I made soup and bread. You need to eat and then you need to tell me everything. Inside, Freya greeted Nate like he'd been gone for days instead of hours. She jumped up, putting her paws on his chest, licking his face, her tail wagging so hard her whole back end moved with it. The puppies tumbled over each other, trying to reach him, yipping and crying and climbing all over his feet. They missed you, Iris said with a knowing smile. Especially her. She was pacing by the door the whole time you were gone. Nate knelt down and let Freya cover him with kisses, let the puppies swarm over him in a wave of puppy breath and sharp little teeth. "It's okay, girl," he murmured to Freya. "It's over. You're safe. You're home." And that's what it was, he realized. Home. Not the rental house with its sparse furniture and temporary feeling, but this connection, this love, this being needed and needed in return. The puppies needed him. Freya needed him. Lauren needed him to be present and honest. The rescue network needed his time and energy. He'd spent so many years being needed by a job that didn't care about him, and now he was needed by creatures and people who did. They ate Iris's soup at the kitchen table, the four of them, Nate, Lauren, Iris, and Colleen, who'd stopped by after getting word about the outcome. They talked and laughed and made plans for the upcoming adoption process for the puppies. They decided to screen potential families carefully to make sure each pup went to a home that would love them properly. "Except Ember," Lauren said suddenly. "I want to adopt Ember." Nate looked at her in surprise. "Really? Really? She's special, Dad. The smallest one, the fighter. I have a feeling she and I are supposed to be together. My apartment allows dogs, and I've been thinking about getting one for a while now. It feels right." "It does feel right," Nate agreed. He picked up the tiny tan puppy, who looked up at him with bright eyes. "You hear that, little one? You're going home with Lauren. And you're keeping Freya, obviously," Lauren said. "Obviously. I can't imagine life without her now." That evening, after everyone had gone home and Lauren had gone to bed in the spare room, Nate sat on the floor with Freya and the puppies. He thought about how much had changed in 6 weeks. He'd gone from a man with nothing to live for to a man with purpose, connection, family. He'd stood up to someone who scared him, fought for what mattered, and won. The anonymous letter that had started this confrontation was still on his kitchen counter. He picked it up and read it again, thinking about the person who'd trusted him with Freya's life, who'd seen his lights on late at night and thought, here's someone who might care. They'd been right. He had cared. And that caring had saved more than just 6 dogs. It had saved him, too. Freya rested her head in his lap, and Nate stroked her ears in the quiet house. Outside, snow was starting to fall again, soft and peaceful. Inside, surrounded by the warmth of dogs who trusted him and the knowledge that his daughter was sleeping down the hall, Nate Kemper felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. He felt whole. 3 months later, on a warm afternoon in late May, Nate stood in his backyard watching Freya play with a foster dog named Cooper, an old beagle whose owner had passed away and left him without a home. The yard looked different now. He'd put up a proper fence, built a small deck, planted flowers along the border. The rental house had stopped feeling temporary somewhere along the way and started feeling like a place he might actually want to stay. Lauren pulled into the driveway, and Ember came bounding out of the car the moment the door opened. The little tan puppy had grown into a beautiful young dog, lean and energetic, devoted to Lauren in the way rescue dogs often are to the people who give them second chances. She raced into the backyard and tackled Freya with puppy enthusiasm, and the older dog played along with patient affection. "How's my girl?" Nate asked, hugging his daughter. "Exhausting. She ate my favorite shoes last week." But Lauren was grinning, and there was a lightness in her that hadn't been there before. "How's Cooper settling in?" "He's doing well. Took him a few days to trust me, but now he follows me everywhere. I think I've got a family lined up for him, retired couple in Petoskey who lost their beagle last year. I'm doing a home visit next week." They sat on the new deck with glasses of iced tea while the dogs played in the grass. The Maple Ridge Rescue Network had grown beyond anything Nate had imagined. They had 15 active foster families now, a fundraising committee that had already raised $8,000, and a partnership with 3 local veterinary clinics. They'd placed 23 dogs in the past 3 months, and the word was spreading to surrounding counties. Nate had become the logistics coordinator, using his engineering background to develop systems for tracking animals, managing volunteers, and coordinating adoptions. It turned out that the skills he'd spent decades developing at his job translated well to running a rescue operation. The difference was that now he cared deeply about the outcome, about every single animal they helped. "Bryce called me yesterday," Lauren said. "He's planning to visit in July. Wants to bring his girlfriend." "He has a girlfriend?" "For 6 months now. I guess he wasn't sure how to tell you, but things are changing between you two. He notices the difference." "What difference?" "You answer when he calls. You ask about his life. You remember details he tells you." She smiled. "You're present, Dad. That's the difference." The back door opened, and Iris came out carrying a tray of sandwiches. She'd started letting herself in, treating Nate's house like an extension of her own. They'd become genuine friends, the kind of friendship that forms between people who've helped each other through difficult times. "Greta called," Iris announced. "Dutton's facility passed its 3-month inspection. They found improvements, better conditions for the dogs. He's not happy about it, but he's complying." "Good," Nate said. He still thought about that confrontation sometimes, about standing up to Dutton and meaning it. He'd discovered something about himself in that sheriff's office, that he was capable of courage when it mattered, that he could fight for things beyond himself. "Doctor." Pemberton's truck pulled up out front, and moments later he and Colleen came around the side of the house. They'd gotten into the habit of stopping by on Sunday afternoons, bringing food and conversation, checking on whatever foster dog Nate currently had. It had become a tradition, this gathering of people who'd found each other through their shared love of helping animals. "I brought potato salad," Colleen said, setting a bowl on the deck table, and Hugh made his famous brownies. "They're not famous," Dr. Pemberton protested. "I just follow the recipe on the box." "They're famous to us," Iris said firmly. They ate lunch together on the deck, talking and laughing, making plans for an upcoming adoption event at the town park. Freya moved among them, accepting pets and treats, Cooper snoozing in a patch of sunlight, Ember playing with a ball Lauren had brought. It was easy and comfortable, the kind of Sunday afternoon Nate had never made time for in his old life. After lunch, Lauren helped him clean up, while the others threw the ball for Ember. They worked side by side at the kitchen sink, washing and drying dishes in companionable silence. "I'm glad you found them, Dad," Lauren said quietly. "The dogs, I mean. I'm glad you were home that morning. I'm glad you opened the door." "Me too." Nate dried a plate, set it in the cabinet. "You know what's strange? For months after the divorce, I felt like my life was over, like I'd wasted everything and there was nothing left. But finding Freya and those puppies, that was just the beginning, not the end. That's because you finally stopped running. You stood still long enough to let life find you again." Through the window, Nate watched his friends in the backyard, watched the dogs playing, watched the way the afternoon light filtered through the maple trees. He thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, alone in this house, going through the motions, convinced he had nothing left to offer the world. That man felt like a stranger now. He still carried regrets. He couldn't undo the years he'd missed with his kids, the marriage he'd let fall apart through neglect and absence. But he'd learned that you couldn't build a future by dwelling on the past. You could only acknowledge what you'd done wrong, make amends where possible, and commit to doing better going forward. Every morning now, he woke with purpose. Dogs to feed, volunteers to coordinate, adoptions to arrange, phone calls with his kids that were real conversations instead of awkward check-ins. Coffee with Dr. Pemberton, helping Iris with her yard work, planning events with Colleen, a life built from small moments of connection and care. Freya had taught him that. She'd survived terrible things, endured cruelty and hardship, travelled miles through snow and cold to find safety. And when she found it, when she found him, she'd trusted again. She'd opened her heart again despite every reason not to. If she could do that, If she could choose hope and connection after everything she'd been through, then he could too. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Nate sat on the porch with Freya at his feet and Cooper curled beside him. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink, and somewhere down the street kids were playing, their laughter carrying on the warm air. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Bryce. "Looking forward to July. Can't wait to meet your girlfriend. Love you, son." The response came back quickly. "Love you too, Dad." 3 words that meant everything. Nate looked down at Freya, at this dog who'd changed his life simply by showing up when he needed her most. She looked back at him with those deep brown eyes, and her tail thumped against the porch. "We did okay, didn't we, girl?" he said softly. "We figured it out together." She rested her head on his knee, and they sat like that as the sun went down and the fireflies began to appear in the grass. A man and his dog, both rescued, both home. The next morning would bring new challenges. New dogs who needed help, new chances to show up and be present and make a difference. But for now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Sometimes the ones who need saving the most are the ones who do the rescuing. Nate had learned that truth the hard way, but he'd learned it well. And he'd spend the rest of his life grateful for the frozen February morning when a dying German shepherd and her 5 puppies had chosen his door to collapse beside. They hadn't just needed him, they'd saved him, and that made all the difference.